Hello and welcome to another episode of Piecemeal Painting. So we're going to talk today about mixing skin tones, and there are a variety of different skin tones obviously out there. We're going to focus on a Caucasian one today. So the first thing you need to know is that before I start on the face, I've already done some work on the eyes and the inside of the shawl. So we talked about how we want to do backgrounds first always. So the face is obviously going to be overlapping the background of the shawl, and the eyelids are going to be covering over top of obviously the eye. So we want to make sure the iris and the pupil are done before the face. I also took a little bit of time with an eraser to go over with the eraser all of my guidelines. You can still see them here and there as well, and that's actually okay. It's where the texture of the canvas works in our favor, because that way we can still see the details because the paint, unfortunately, because there's yellow and red involved, it's not as opaque as we are going to like it to be. We're going to start with about 6 parts white, 1 part red, 1 part yellow. So titanium white, bright red, and bright yellow. And that mixture together is going to make us a fairly good skin tone for our purposes. When it comes to darkening the skin tone for shadows, I'm going to be using a little bit of brown or burnt umber, very small amounts of that, not black. Black tends to consume and take over a color. Brown is a bit more of a moderate tone. It will darken the skin tone without making it too dark. And we're just going to start with that. So a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and I tend to do the darker colors first only when it comes to skin tones, just because there's so much white involved. Now here you can see I've got too much red. It's becoming more pink, so I'm going to add a bit more yellow to the mixture, and that's going to just warm up the tone and make it a little more of a Caucasian skin tone. And once you get the right balance of colors, and that does take a little bit of work, a little bit of doing here and there, then we can start applying our base coat. And while the base coat is still wet, then we can start making some adjustments to the cheekbones, to the chin, to the jaw, etc. All right, so that's looking fairly good right there. Just want to make sure that all the paint is fully mixed, and that includes on my brush as well. I'm not too worried about the bristles at the top, but the bristles at the bottom really do need to have a single consistent color for my base tone. Right. And what I tend to do when I'm painting, I'm going to follow contours. So if we think about, for example, our nose, the bridge of the nose sticks out. So I'm going to have all my brush stroke kind of work away from the bridge of the nose there. And same with the eyelids. We're going to have them kind of curve. And that doesn't show up excessively well when it comes to the painting itself, but it's a good practice, I think, just to kind of keep in mind where all of our bumps are, where our shadows and shading will be. So here's our cheekbone, and it comes up and then into the more left to right strokes for our forehead. And if it turns out that skin tone is a little bit dark, you can always add a bit of white to it to lighten it. Being more of a Mediterranean individual, or olive-toned, darker skin, we can work with that. Now I am going to cover these eyebrows, but you'll notice that where the pencil was, even though I erased it, a little bit of them does still show up. And that's great for my purposes, so I can see where they were. And that makes all of that rough work we did beforehand a little bit more poignant, a little more worthwhile. Now, when it comes to the detail around small areas of fine detail, such as around the eye, I've got another brush I've got here, which I'm going to be using instead. And that will just make it a little easier to get into those hard to reach areas. So here I've got a smaller brush, and that just means there's less chance of me getting some paint in the sclera of the eye, the white part of the eye. And I've got a little more of the ability to control where that paint goes. All right, so I'm going to work on that for a little bit. Lips, when I get to them, are just a darker version of the skin around them. So I'm going to add a little bit of red to my skin tone mixture to achieve those lips. And again, brown for darkening areas. And that includes also the nostrils. I'm not going to use black for them. I'm going to use brown. Because the only real black that we have is in the pupil of the eye. And of course, where I mixed some brown to get the darker part of the eye on top there. So this is certainly a process which is time consuming, but worthwhile. It's worth all of this work in the end. And again, you can see where the pencil lines do show through because of the red and yellow we used in mixing the skin tone there. Okay, so I'm going to finish off around this eye, and then we're going to show you what a bit of brown can do, just to darken and add some shading to the work. And I can't stress enough, when we add brown, it's very subtle, it's very small amounts that we're going to be using. Okay, so we've got the brown right here, the burnt umber. Just going to take a slice of it, just small amount. That will focus there. And we're going to add that to our mix. And already you can see it really has a huge effect. It darkens it quite a bit, even that small amount. So again, we want really small amounts. If you do add too much brown and the skin kind of looks a bit more, well, a bit more dead, at that point we can add a bit of red to it, and that tends to liven it up again. So around the eye, just gonna add a bit of shading there. And again, we can see it's very subtle. We don't want it to stand out too much. We don't want it to look like there's bags under her eyes. We just want to add some shading where the ocular cavity would be. Again, it's very warm out at the moment here, so I am just going to add a little bit of water to my brush just to lighten and liven up that paint. Just a small drop of water, and then that will just make the paint a little easier to work with. We can smooth it out there. And again, very subtle. We don't want it to look like she hasn't slept in days. Okay, great. You often do get some shading just by the corner of the eye here, and that shading kind of loops up to where the eyebrow is as well. So we'll add some of that there as well. Okay, hope you can see that on camera there. The camera does sometimes skew some of the more subtle tones here and there. All right, and again, brown, just for that little slip of skin that we have to show where the eyebrow is. And again, using my very thin brush, I'm just going to use the pencil lines, which I can still kind of just make out, and go over those nice and dark without being black. There we are. And if you go a bit too thick, like I just did right there, we've still got our skin tone here. We can just clean off our brush, use our paper towel, which we have handy, to clean off the excess, and take some more of that skin tone, and just kind of adjust, paint over where we need to, if it got a bit too thick perhaps there. There we go. That's better. All right. Eyebrow, same thing. I'm going to use very small slashy kind of motions to show where the eyebrows are. I'm going to try and draw each individual hair at first on the edges, and then where they kind of come together, we can afford to kind of combine them a bit more. So just like we did in our eye video, the eyebrows tend to be more straight up, closer to the tear duct, and more horizontal by the time we get to the side there. Now, unfortunately, I might need a smaller brush to show those individual lines, but let's see if we can't get some in there. Ah, there we go. Okay. All right. And my paint is already drying out really fast right now, so. Another thing we probably should talk about very briefly is the fact that the quality of paints make a really big difference. So whereas I tend not to worry about my canvas too much, I tend to buy the budget canvases. I will splurge every now and then on nicer paints to allow for a better end result when it comes to the paint quality. Because this one here, unfortunately, I'm having a little trouble having those lines show up nicely. Okay, that's better. There we go. Give her nice sculpted eyebrows. I'm not sure if they had the ability to do that back in the 3rd century BC, but there we are. And we can see where our pencil lines were. The other thing too is that as you're painting, you might find you need to make some adjustments here and there. Maybe that eyebrow comes down a bit too far for my liking, but at this point, I'm not going to be too concerned about that. The one nice thing about the paint drying so fast is that if you do little clumps like that as well, you can kind of very quickly wait for them to dry and just use your finger to get them off. Okay, so she's coming along there. Again, for darkening areas, thinking about where your light source is, where your shadows would be, I can use a little bit of brown, mix it with my skin tone again. And because it's right beneath the shawl, I've got it more brown there. And we can darken up this area right here below where the shawl is. And that will create some really nice shadows in our work as well. All right, so I hope you found that helpful to get started on the painting. I'm going to keep working on that for a little bit and we'll come back and see how it's turning out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy them, and have a great day. Bye-bye now.